Another deadly plane crash. Yeah, look, the gist of it is this. In Washington, D.C., it's insane, genuinely. Like, unprecedented, I think. A plane crashed into a Black Hawk helicopter. I think the Black Hawk helicopter was actually part of, or had the potential to be part of, the presidential guard retinue. They crashed into each other. Just like a midair collision. It's insane.
Breaking news coverage of that deadly midair collision overnight in Washington, D.C. We've learned just moments ago that there are no survivors. This is now a recovery mission. Newly appointed Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy spoke moments ago about the flight patterns.
The helicopter was in a standard pattern.
I can't hear you, man.
You'll see helicopters up and down the river. This flight pattern is seen oftentimes when you live in D.C. This was a standard flight pattern last night as well.
I think my understanding is that the helicopter was doing the right thing and the plane was doing the wrong thing. I could be wrong on that. That the helicopter was doing kind of a regular flight pattern and the plane was just in the wrong place. This is after decades and decades. Wrong? I'm wrong. Okay, maybe I heard the opposite. No, all right, that's fine. That's fine, you know? I've been talking about autism and bicycles for a while.
There were 64 people on the plane and 3 on the military helicopter. Elizabeth Schulze is in D.C., but what we know about the victims at this hour. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Hey, good morning, Michael. We are inside Terminal 1 of Reagan Airport. The airport
is still
closed
had its lights
through
off
this morning, but we are expecting a briefing here with the mayor of D.C. within the next hour. Officials so far are not commenting on any of the victims' identities beyond.
God help us if the pilot was black. Well, they're already blaming this on DEI. We'll get to it. Vosh, you're wrong. Basically, the plane was told to move last minute to a different runway, which is a RAR approach, and Hello was looking at the ROM plane doing a VOWL approach. Really, I'm wrong, but 4 typos in 1 sentence? Well, from the mouth of baby-brained individuals comes wisdom, I suppose. Yeah, it's really, really bad. It's, like, horrifically embarrassing. Look, I'm not interested. They're right, though. Well, you might be right, but typo, point ignored. No, really, though, like, I'm not into the logistics on this. To be honest, I don't really care. I'm not, revising flight traffic control patterns. This is after decades and decades and decades, though. It's my understanding, decades of mismanagement with regard to airspace in D.C. and just broadly, So not only... here, I think, there's a Democracy Now! Video on it, which they put out remarkably quickly, but I guess it's out of D.C., so...
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
Rescue workers...
Conservatives have already pointed out that one of the control tower workers is a woman. Well, that's great. That's good. That's great. Staffing was not normal at Airport Tower, according to a preliminary FAA report. Staffing at the air traffic control tower at Ronald Reagan National Airport was not normal for the time of day and volume of traffic. Didn't Trump literally just fire, like, tons and tons of people in the FAA? Like, the administrator or... Yeah, the FAA administrator position is vacant because Elon Musk told him to resign. Trump talks in it last 10 minutes or when he answers questions. I feel like I already have an idea of... what Donald Trump has to say on this.
Standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. Then they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was...
You guys remember the take I had a while ago where it was a net detriment to society that we made saying the N-word a hard taboo? Because since then, all of conservatism has just been finding new ways of saying the N-word in increasingly, like, obscure, labyrinthine euphemisms. Whereas, like, we would be spared all of that. Like, Donald Trump would just be up there saying, like, N-word, N-word, like, all the time. And we would at least have the, like, the simplicity of it rather than having to navigate it. It This is going to happen to literally everything all the time. It doesn't matter what evidence there is. I've said this before. It doesn't matter if every single person involved was an Aryan white male, 6'2", Giga Chad jawline, former Green Beret, blue eyes, blonde hair. It doesn't matter. It'll always get blamed on DEI. It does not matter. It doesn't matter. We already know that the right is willing to play this game even when the people that are being targeted are normally on their side, because they did this with the Jan 6 Capitol Police. Missed this entirely. The FAA administrator criticized SpaceX's safety record and threatened fines. Musk demanded he resigned. He did on January 20th. That rules, man. Love a functioning democracy. Yeah. The unelected oligarch just bullying high-level bureaucrats out of position. Very cool. This tweet made 14 hours before the crash. An FAA employee I know confirms agency already lacks sufficient air traffic controllers. The so-called buyouts and other attacks on federal employees won't help. Remember that fact when the flight delays crashes? This was before the crash, mind you. 5 a.m. yesterday. Commence and Trumpers start falsely blaming DEI or Biden. Perfectly prescient. Lisan Al-Gaib. Well, it doesn't exactly take a genius to see how this all plays out, because it's happened 50,000 times before. Everything gets worse because the government underfunds, understaffs it, cuts personnel, cuts quality, makes everything worse. The government, usually Republicans, deliberately defund government institutions to make them ineffective. And then when they're ineffective, they point at it and say, this is ineffective because of wokeness and DEI, and we're going to fix it by privatizing it and or whatever else. It's a constant, race war rally. It's not slick. Do you think Trump is to blame for this crash? Yes. They'd blame Biden if he was in office. Yeah, it's Trump's crash. Yes, 100%. They're literally they came in and immediately started cutting people from positions directly relevant to this. If nothing else, the austerity that led to what happened today is something he is looking to continue. What else can you do? This is only going to get worse with time, man. Literally every single problem they're going to respond to with this. And you have to think, man, I understand that Republicans are really racist and like it when everything gets blamed on DEI. I understand they're pretty susceptible to rhetoric like this. But when everything is getting worse all the time, and it's only going to keep getting worse under Trump, how long does this keep selling? How long, the Nazis blame the Jews for losing World War I. They blame the Jews for the money that the German government had to pay out after the Treaty of Versailles. They blame the Jews for the Great Depression. They blame the Jews for everything. They kept blaming the Jews, throughout World War II. I'm not going to back this up with evidence because I'm spiritually correct and God whispers to my ear, he tells me I'm correct. I guarantee you every time a platoon of the Wehrmacht ran out of ammunition, they were blaming the Jews. I guarantee you. They requested 6 tons of ammunition. They received 4. They open up the cast, there's not enough, and they think a Jewish guy ran off with the other 2 tons. I guarantee you. Every day up until the end, up until, they were on the Nuremberg trials, which they also blamed on the Jews. They blamed the Jews for losing World War II, SMH. Damn, Jews got hands, I guess. Just stubs toe, damn Jew. Literally everything. We know they're going to do this forever. Acting like the AFD today isn't doing that shit. I mean, I don't know why you had to frame it in that way. Possibly because you're 14 and casual adversarial language is the way you communicate with others. What do you mean, Vosh acting like? You think I don't criticize the AFD? Stubs toe, thanks Obama? Will they ever acknowledge this is the administration's fault, though? I do genuinely think there has to be a breaking point, and part of the reason why is that unlike the Nazis, the Republicans can't acknowledge what they're actually saying. A lot of Republicans genuinely do think that when Trump says DEI, he means DEI. I know it's crazy because you'd have to be so stupid to believe him, but a lot of Republicans really genuinely do think that there is a lessened quality of labor because of DEI or Biden appointees or Obama appointees. And I'm not saying those people aren't also racist. I'm saying that they haven't reached the Nazi level of they're aware of the fact that they're just as a spiritual prerequisite, as a default position, just naming the enemy group. And the fact that Republicans can't do that, because if they started to do that, you know, they would genuinely lose a lot of supporters. It limits their ability to get away with this indefinitely. But, you know, maybe that's just me being optimistic. Because otherwise you're just getting a lot of this.
Today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. We then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level. When you have 60 planes coming in during a short period of time, and they're all coming in different directions, and you're dealing with very high-level computer work and very complex computers. And one of the other things I will tell you is that the systems that were built.
Wow, it really is a thought-terminating cliche. Yeah. There's no thought put into. There's no consideration. Like I said, literally every person involved could be a Giga Chad 6'2", blonde hair, blue-eyed, Aryan, you know, former Green Beret male, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I was going to rebuild the entire system, and then we had an election that didn't turn out the way it should have.
But it's like stuff like this is going to keep happening. I need you all to prepare. Like this is one of the worst aviation disasters in American history. It was directly caused by, in my humble opinion, directly caused by systemic factors that Trump has contributed to. Whether or not he specifically caused it is, to me, irrelevant, because Trump isn't really in control of his own presidency. He's just a mouthpiece. He's a representative for an ideology and a system of government that contributed to what's happening here. This process has been going on decades. Just to remind chat, this is supposed to be the honeymoon period during a presidency. Yep. Yeah, don't forget, man. Okay. Normally it takes like years for this for controversy to start mounting like this. Okay. And things are only going to get worse. You all need to prepare, okay? At every level of society, there are going to be breakdowns, mass food recalls, drought, unavailability of produce, crashes, mismanagement at every level, everything federal, airlines, disbursement, paying your taxes, whatever. All of it's going to get worse. This country is going to break. There's no getting around that. Feels like a bad time to be relying on a wheelchair? Yep. In the memo put out by the White House, he literally said not DEI, but DEIA. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and ability. That's part of the DEI, spectrum now. Or sorry, yeah, accessibility, not ability. Thank you. I was thinking disability, accessibility. Yeah. But yeah, same pointers. The ramp that you use to get up to the building next to the stairs, that's woke. Stocking up on rice and beans, boss. That's good to know. Now, I am no expert on this subject, so I'm going to blatantly content steal. Democracy Now! Help me out, okay? You know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. Please inform me.
In Washington, D.C. have launched a massive search operation in the Potomac River after an American Airlines flight and a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter collided mid-air late Wednesday, with both aircraft crashing into the water. Officials say there are likely no survivors. At least 30 bodies have been pulled from the river. American Airlines Flight 5342 had 60 passengers and 4 crew members on board and was en route to the D.C. area Reagan National Airport from Wichita, Kansas. The Black Hawk helicopter had 3 soldiers on board conducting a training flight. The National Transportation Safety Board will investigate with the Federal Aviation Administration.
The crash comes just days after the head...
I suppose we should consider ourselves lucky that this happened over the Potomac, right? Did I pronounce that correctly? And not over a populated area.
Head of the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, Mike Whitaker, stepped down. FAA administrators usually serve 5-year terms. Trump has not named a replacement. Whitaker announced his planned departure in December after SpaceX CEO, Trump donor, richest man in the world, Elon Musk, repeatedly attacked him on social media, tweeting he needs to resign. Musk was responding to $600,000 in FAA fines against SpaceX for safety violations along Florida's Space Coast. For more, we're joined by David Sirota.
That's great, man.
Editor-in-chief of The Lever, which has a new report headlined Before D.C. Airport Collision. Lawmakers...
On your point of Republicans avoiding being careful, openly avoiding being careful of being openly racist, you should see how many non-white people are interned at the Heritage Foundation. Oh, yeah, they love their DEI hires. But genuinely, like, this is what I mean. I love this term liberal fascism because it feels so descriptive. You have fascists running a fascist government, destroying democracy, but then they'll talk about, like, meritocracy, equality of opportunity. You know, they're not racist. They believe in equality for everyone. And the rhetoric is totally mismatched from the actual political goals. And there are people who parse the rhetoric and they're like, okay, I know what we really are. We're fascists. So, like, I'm going to act like one. And those are usually the ones who get into government. But there are a lot of people who fall for this bullshit. And the God's honest truth is that, like, if you were to America is very multicultural. How much of Germany in 1930s was like ethnically Aryan? I don't even believe that's a thing, but you know what I mean, right? So like non-Jewish German citizens who were white, so on and so forth. Probably a pretty significant majority of them, right? Like probably quite a bit of them. And judging from the average political demographics of the 1930s, all of them probably started being anti-Semitic like way before the Nazis took over. The anti-Semitism thing, Hitler didn't invent that or whatever. He was taking advantage of that. It could have been any group. It could have been like Romani specifically. I mean, they got put to the camps too. It could have been homosexuals specifically. I mean, and they got put to the camps too. I just mean to say, like, they took advantage of what was already there. Now, over here in America, is white supremacy already here? Absolutely. Though nowhere near as much as like anti-Semitism was in Germany in the 1930s. But if you were to like do a demographic breakdown, man, there are a lot of non-white people in this country, and they are, a lot of them at least, in the centers of power. Unlike Germany 1930s, American power is in the cities, like vastly in the cities, you know? Los Angeles, New York City, Detroit, Chicago, Miami, whatever, like the major cities, these are like the epicenters of global commerce. Like it's not just, you know, like you have a general production base across the country. We know where our wealth is. And there's a lot of minorities in those cities. Now, how popular do you think a Republican message of explicit, unambiguous, non-euphemized white supremacy would be? God's honest truth, I think they'd be lucky to get 15% of the country. And it'd be 99% white people. I just don't think they could sell it. And I think this is a limiting factor for them. I really do think so. You understand the point that I'm making here, right? They are going to keep doing this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Every disaster they're going to blame on DEI. Every time. If there's a shortage, DEI. The firefighters, even though the average Los Angelian firefighter is like a hulking white guy, DEI. Here's an AI-generated photo of a fat SJW with purple hair in a firefighter's uniform. DEI. No water? DEI. Hurricane hits Florida? DEI. Boeing plane part falls off? DEI. Everything is DEI. Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Brushed off warnings and boosted flights. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, David. You know, this story is so horrific. I know the skating community well. My sister-in-law was almost in the Olympics as a skater, her mother a coach. The horror that many on the flight were young ones who were training for ultimately to go into the Olympics, their families waiting at Reagan Airport. The American Airlines flight taking them back from Wichita training camp after the Nationals collides with an Army Black Hawk helicopter. They say it was a training flight. Can you talk about
average conservative take on DEI? Yeah. Well, keep in mind, Charlie Kirk isn't one of those like buffoonish MAGA supporters. Charlie Kirk is a Nazi, and he knows what he is.
And that's why I think this United story and the DEI story hits so hard, because we've all been in the back of a plane when the turbulence hits, or when you're flying through a storm and you're like, I'm so glad I saw the guy with the right stuff and the square jaw get into the cockpit before we took off. And I feel better now thinking about that. No, I mean, like, you want to go thought crime? Like, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Well, that's the you wouldn't have done. But Charlie knows what he is, so he's not really in the same category. Charlie's job is to try to move people over from category A to category B. A CNN pundit backed down after blaming Trump for the crash. Well, yeah, obviously. You can only make wild overstatements if you are right-wing. If you make any kind of statement that's even remotely partisan against Trump, it had better be the most, like, moderate, factually backed, like close to the chest statement imaginable. Otherwise, like, your bosses will tell you to pull it, because every news agency is owned by Trump supporters.
This piece that you wrote, despite mid-flight near misses and dire pleas, airline bankrolled lawmakers recently expanded flight traffic at Washington's busy airport. David, I just watched the news briefing. There was the two...
Honestly, if I see a woman or a black person or any other minority pilot, they're probably more qualified than the average white dude pilot. Has anyone read the Preacher comics, the Garth Ennis comics from the late 90s, where they open Herr Starr by saying, shoot the woman first? If you're fighting a terrorist cell, any woman would have to have proven themselves 10 times as hard as any man in that cell. Make sure to shoot her first. She's the most dangerous one there. Those are so good. It was a good-ass comics, man.
Virginia senators who objected to this expansion, right? Tim Kaine, as well as Senator Warner. They didn't mention that this morning, but if you can talk all about it,
women are badass in general. Let's not overstate things.
Sure. So Washington National Airport is a relatively small airport and one of the busiest, if not the busiest airport in the country, because of how close it is to the center of Washington, D.C., the city there. For years, there has been a debate about whether to expand the amount of flights that can go into Washington Reagan Airport. And over the course of a few decades, there has been a steady increase in the number of slots, that is to say, the amount of traffic at Washington National Airport, air traffic. And just a few months ago, as we reported, that debate over...
This is a real problem, by the way. I don't talk about it often because I don't know nearly as much about planes as I do like road infrastructure and trains and stuff like that. But for decades now, we have been slowly upticking how much traffic certain airports get, because those cities get more and more and more traffic. Unlike roads, where if there are too many cars coming in, you just get traffic. And unlike trains, which are perfect and can carry basically as many people as you need all the time with no problems, thank you, with planes, you can't have too many planes coming in at an airport at one time. You've only got so many landing strips. And you can only expand airports in urban areas so much. In many cases, you can't at all. Airports are really difficult to expand. Like, they're incredibly expensive. You need a ton of, like, clearance coming in. I'd have to learn more about that before I could really talk about it, Kowalski. It does make sense to me, though, that like the lack of military expertise in piloting and air traffic controllers could contribute to a decline in the standards of their work. Remember how Reagan was the one who broke up the air traffic controller strike over insane working conditions that led for it to be illegal to federal employees to strike? Yep. That's the one group of people that I want operating under really stressful conditions. Air traffic controllers. Haven't you seen Breaking Bad? You fools.
How much to expand Washington National hit a fever pitch in Congress. There's been a push by a set of airlines to expand those flights. There's some other airlines that don't want to expand those flights because they're already controlling those routes. So there's a sort of an economic battle going on. Who gets to control what routes? But at the core of it, according to
DCA is also physically incapable of expanding. Well, yeah, the Ronald Reagan Airport can't expand. Like, you can look at it on maps. Where would it expand? What can you imagine what they would have to destroy to expand that airport? It's just not doable, you know?
Of this, including the senators that you mentioned, there is a very deep safety concern at this airport because there had been a series of near misses, near collisions at the airport because it is so heavily trafficked. So a few months ago, put into the FAA authorization bill was a some language that further expanded these slots and also the perimeter. That's the length of the flights that are allowed to come into Washington National. Basically, this is the opponents argue this is Congress people from cities farther away from Washington want more direct flights into Washington because it's more convenient for them. That's the opponent's argument. But again, at the core is the safety question. There have been real safety concerns, again, about these near misses at this particular airport. And so a few months ago, that language was slipped into the FAA reauthorization bill, which further expanded the traffic. And it should be said, when it actually came up for a vote in the House in 2023, the House...
I feel like it's actually a miracle this hasn't happened already, if you think about it. It's genuinely crazy. I think it's difficult to abstract, like, how do two flying bodies collide? There's so much air and so little plane up there. But if you think about it, like, planes follow very regular paths. You have to account for wind, and you have to account for, like, the average direction of the landing strips at an airport. Like, you're directed to take the one that's available depending on, like, the headwind. So you've got maybe two angles from which you can come at it. And then, like, oftentimes the lanes are filled on both, so you have to wait or taxi around for a bit. And then you've got people coming up and going down, and sometimes it's foggy and you don't always get perfect information. And you have computer systems, yeah, but those don't always help you perfectly. A tiny computer glitch, a slight delay in the information you're getting, a misregistry of which plane is going at what time, a slight bit of inattentiveness from a pilot. Like, there are so many levels where, like, a little mistake, you know, a few packets of data missed, just anything.
Voted it down. So there were some legislative machinations here in which the proponents of this had to slip it into a larger bill, kind of stealthily, to get this expansion passed. And Tim Kaine said he was very concerned about the prospect of collisions at this airport, begging lawmakers to not do this.
And could you talk, David Sirota, about the significance of the fact that the collision occurred with a Black Hawk helicopter?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, we don't know the exactly what happened and what is at issue here with an alleged training flight of helicopters. But I think it's worth saying this. If you've ever been near or flown into Washington National Airport, you can see it's some of the most heavily trafficked airspace in the world.
When I was in D.C., there was always some shit. You could always see people going in or out, you know?
Including by the military. So I think what we're talking about here is whether an airport that is already so stressed, already so at capacity, arguably over capacity, whether it should have been, the air traffic should have been expanded, knowing, again, it's also additional special circumstance of being around so much additional air traffic vis-a-vis the military.
And this whole idea of who is in charge of the military flights, I mean, this is unusual at this airport as opposed to all others. I was talking to someone who was saying that pilots actually most fear this airport. It's one of the most dangerous in the country, where you have all these Black Hawk helicopters, and they take military officials and other officials, and then you've got all the civilian flights that they keep increasing. How much do they communicate with each other, David?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
Reagan should have been closed years ago, but the Pentagon forces it to stay open because of its proximity. This is just another example, and we talk about this all the time in the context of cars, but like it's like Treatler. Everyone wants their Grubhub delivery or whatever everyone wants to be able to fly into every airport in the world for cheap. Everyone wants to be able to drive anywhere with no traffic, easy to find parking. The world doesn't work that way. It's a finite planet. And eventually we need to put our foot down, because we're straining everything to the absolute limit of capacity, of safety, past the limit. And we're running into, like, it's toxic individualism. We need to live in a world where people can say, I understand why I can't have that easy thing. Because if everyone could have that easy thing, it would destroy society. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where people are like, I can't have that easy thing. I am now Adolf Hitler. That's not the world I want to live in. You can't have everything.
I have seen some reporting saying that the radar wasn't communicating on this training flight. I'm not sure that's been substantiated. So I'm not trying to put out misinformation or disinformation.
These are just the questions.
Right. It's only to say that, again, this particular space, this airspace, has been a known safety hazard for a very long time, and certain airlines who spend money on lobbying Congress and campaign contributions to key members of Congress have been pushing to expand the amount of flights into.
Have you seen the Wendover video about Vail Airport struggling to expand because rich people want to fly in, even though it's like near impossible to land in? I have not seen that video. I'm familiar with the phenomena. It's like every level of society, man. And it feels like it's all happening at once too, you know? Because people want more capacity, more convenience. But eventually, like up until this point in a lot of areas of infrastructure, we've been able to come up with a solution to make it better. Oh, like inner city traffic is too bad. Well, what if we introduce like a bunch of gridlocked one-way roads? That helps with traffic, and it does. What, you know, people not able to like travel across the country via car. What if we added interurban highways or whatever? That way you can just get right into the city and not be locked in on the outside or whatever, you know? People want to fly. What if we run every airline to the absolute brink of profitability? We subsidize the hell out of it. We open up the capacity of every airport that gets any use in the country, like well beyond what it should be. And then we run all the FAA air traffic controllers into the ground. Like what if we overload everything pushed to the breaking point just to keep the dollar, like, you know, the value down, just to make it easy, just to make it accessible. And then eventually you just run out. Eventually you run to like basically a thermodynamic limit. You just run up against the laws of the universe. No, you just can't have that many planes going into Ronald Reagan every goddamn day. You just can't. You can't do it. And people aren't going to take it.
This particular airport. And again, I just want to say one other thing here. This is a city that is served by a much larger airport farther out of the city, Dulles Airport. And so the argument has been, listen, we should not expand the amount of flights going into Washington Reagan, even though it's more convenient for passengers when you get off the plane because it's closer to the city, because we have a larger airport a little bit further away. So the argument was, again, this is members of Congress who want, for their convenience, to fly to the closest airport to their office, and the argument was that they were listening to their airline donors, they were listening to their desire for their own convenience, not listening to the multiple safety warnings about this airport.
And let's remember, it's called now Reagan National Airport, used to be National Airport, known for President Reagan, and President Reagan is known for breaking up the PATCO union, the air traffic controllers union, back in the 1980s.
Absolutely, and there's been questions, and I don't know if it's germane to what happened in this disaster, but there have been questions about air traffic control resources, understaffing, the current staff being essentially overworked.
I'm content stealing because, like, genuinely, they just know more about this than I do. I'm just absorbing. I'm learning here. Okay, I can't riff off all of it. Obviously, if you don't know who Democracy Now! Is, I can't help you. I'm sorry, folks.
Of these questions have been swirling for years. And so our job at The Lever, what we do is we look back at the decisions that were made in the lead up to situations like this. And again, these warnings about expanding the flight traffic at this airport came just a few months ago. I mean, if you go read our story, you will see legislators warning, really dire pleas to not expand the amount of traffic at this airport.
David Sirota, you are editor-in-chief of The Lever. You are following what's happening in Washington extremely closely. To say the least, we're talking about everything, everywhere, all at once. With the President Trump's inauguration and the number of executive orders, the number of...
Maybe I can watch it on the Peloton. Okay, it looks like they're expanding it to general analysis, which means that, for the most part, the stuff I was interested in is probably done. It's just, guys, it's only going to get worse. Like, this was a massive disaster. You should see this for what it is, which is like the heralding of an era of breakdown, of everything getting worse all the time. Part of it will be because of Trump. A lot of it will be because of, forces and factors that go beyond Trump that he just is not competent enough to deal with or mitigate. So get ready for that.